Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to who pays for the Baltimore bridge collapse. And I mean, I don't really know how this is going to be like legally, whether it's going to be the company that like owned the ship that crashed into the bridge or taxpayers. I assume it'll probably just fall onto the average person, to be honest, because I assume this is one of the busiest bridges, right? So they'll probably use the excuse of, oh, well, you need this bridge or whatever, and then you're gonna have to pay it. I mean, I don't know the legal sort of ramifications of this stuff. I would hope it would be the company that that owned the ship that crashed, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just given to the average, like the general population, the general public, and they're the ones who have to pay for it through tax and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, we're gonna sort of see through this video, I assume. Maybe it's not actually been like, maybe this guy doesn't actually know, he's just going through the possibilities. But yeah, let's check this out and see what the outcome could be of this, and that's pretty much it. Let's check this out. Links are also in the description to my Patreon, where you can see reactions that I can't post to YouTube, movies, TV series. Links are there for those who want to see that sort of stuff. But let's check this out and see what's going to happen here.
On March 26, Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed into the harbor after a container ship smashed into one of the pylons supporting the structure. At least 6 people have lost their lives. It will cost at least $600 million to rebuild the bridge, and probably a lot more. Both road and water traffic have been delayed, the supply chain has been disrupted, and insurers could face up to $4 billion in damages. But there's one question everyone keeps asking: who's legally responsible? So here's what we know about how the collision unfolded. At about 12:45 a.m., the container ship Dali left the port of Baltimore down the Patapsco River on its way to Sri Lanka. The ship is owned by Grace Owen Private Limited and managed by a company called Synergy Marine Group, both of which are headquartered in Singapore. In the first statement about the collision, Synergy Group said that the ship was, quote, under pilotage with 2 pilots on board. Pilotage of international trade vessels in the United States is regulated by the federal government and by the 24 coastal states. Under Maryland law, quote, each American vessel engaged in foreign trade and each foreign vessel shall employ a licensed pilot to pilot the vessel when it is underway on the navigable waters of the state. That means local pilots have to guide large ships in and out of the harbor because these pilots are experts in the narrow passageways, shallow waters, and traffic patterns. This is not an easy feat given the massive size of these container ships.
You have probably seen them on the bay, huge container ships longer than several football fields, moving heavy equipment like cars and farm machinery.
And you can see in this video what it was like for pilots on their way to board a large ship off of Cape Henry.
Next time I go down the bay, I am going to take Dramamine pills because that little boat gets a little rough down there at the entrance of Cape Henry.
So in the early hours of March 26, 2 harbor pilots had already boarded the Dali, where they prepared to guide the vessel to open water. Morgan McManus, captain of a trading ship, told Fast Company it typically takes 4 pilots to maneuver under a bridge, 3 of who travel with the boat and 1 from the harbor. The ship also has red and green lights to show the pilots the safest place to pass. The ship started its turn toward the Key Bridge at about 12:56 a.m. At 1:25 a.m., the ship reached a speed of about 8 knots, about 9 miles per hour. But 1 minute later, at 1:26, the ship lost power and the crew made a mayday call. You can see from the video that the ship is almost in total darkness at this time.
I haven't seen this crash video for a good few, probably like a week or 2 now, and yeah, man, it's just awful, honestly.
According to 911 records, a dispatcher said,
there's a ship approaching, it just lost their steering, so until you get that under control, we gotta stop all traffic.
Luckily, emergency responders stopped traffic by 1:28 a.m. Once the mayday call went out to the authorities, the crew tried to deploy an anchor. However, if the ship had lost power steering, it would have been hard for it to come to a full stop anyway. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said,
the impact of this collision we're talking about is not just as big as a building, it's really as big as a block. 100,000 tons all going into this pier all at once.
Indeed, the Dali was 948 feet long and 157 feet wide. At 1:29 a.m., the boat lost speed and then slammed into a column holding up the bridge, sending a 1,200-foot section of the structure into the river. A highway construction crew was fixing potholes on the bridge when it collapsed. 8 people fell into the water. 2 were rescued, but
2 were rescued? Oh my god. I'm just thinking, how the hell are you getting rescued from that? And realistically, either dying instantly, or freezing or drowning or whatever it is because of the shock of the situation and all that sort of stuff. Like, flipping hell.
6 others were killed. The workers were from Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador. It took 4 minutes from the mayday call for the bridge to partially collapse, and Governor Wes Moore said the bridge was up to code. So in this situation, who's liable for this crash? Well, the first defendant you would look to sue is Dolly's owner. If reports are accurate that the ship experienced a sudden power failure, investigators will need to find the root cause. Was there an equipment failure? How come there wasn't a backup power generator? What about the collision avoidance equipment? Was the crew negligent? We don't know the answer to any of these questions yet. However, the ships have many levels of redundancy and warnings to prevent exactly this kind of thing. As Fast Company explains here, ships today are equipped with redundant systems for maintaining steering control, typically including 2 autopilot systems in addition to hand steering controls, as well as alarm systems that can alert crews to complications. But ship owners also have a way of limiting their liability. As we discussed in the OceanGate submarine video, after the 1912 Titanic disaster, surviving family members sought compensation from the White Star Line, but the company used the Limitation Act of 1851 to limit its liability. This law gives ship owners the right to preemptively file a claim in federal court before plaintiffs have a chance to sue them. The owners can also raise the act as an affirmative defense if they're sued in federal court. And the act limits plaintiffs to post-loss value of the vessel and its cargo, basically the value of its pending freight. The purpose of the law is to help ship owners avoid bankruptcy, and it works. If a vessel and cargo are completely lost, the value of the vessel cannot be calculated in the owner's assets. And in 1915, a judge found that White Star Line was not guilty and had no knowledge of the errors that led to the sinking of the Titanic. Since the accident was considered the fault of the Titanic's captain and crew, the company's liability was limited to passenger fares, the amount paid for cargo, and any salvage materials recovered from the wreck. The company settled for $664,000 to be divided in a pro rata share among survivors. And a federal court recently explained that, quote, the animating premise of the Limitation Liability Act is that the owner of a vessel is generally an absentee who entrusts the vessel to the command of a captain whom the owner has limited ability to supervise or control once the vessel is on the sea. When there's an injury or loss of life on a commercial vessel, current law requires the owners to make a deposit with the limitation fund to cover the losses. And in this case, that will only impact seamen and other maritime workers. The Limitation Act doesn't apply to wrongful death claims that arise out of maritime accidents that do not happen on a water vessel. So presumably the deaths of the highway crew would not be impacted by the Limitation Act. However, there is an exception to the Limitation Act. When a vessel owner has privity or knowledge of the negligent acts, the act does not apply. Whether the Limitation Act applies in this situation depends on what happened on the Dali and whether the owner knew about the issues that may have led to the failure. Privity or knowledge can be actual or constructive and is present where the exercise of reasonable diligence could have prevented the commission of the act. Thus, the key question for limiting liability is not what the corporation's officers and managers actually knew, but what they objectively ought to have known. Courts typically find an owner cannot limit its liability when it fails to implement or monitor established safety procedures, and this is what happened when the USS John McCain collided with a Liberian-flagged oil tanker, leading to the deaths of 10 Navy sailors. In that case, a federal court declined to apply the Limitation Act because the owners of the vessel had been warned about safety and staffing issues and did not take action. And whether the Dolly's ownership knew about problems with the Dolly...
When did that happen? Was that recent? Or was that quite a long time ago?
Will also be important in wrongful death claims brought by the workers' families. U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral Shannon Gilreath said that the ship was going to undergo routine engine maintenance before it lost power, but he said authorities were not informed of any problems. Though apparently during a stop at the port of San Antonio in Chile, authorities cited the Dolly for problems with its propulsion and auxiliary machinery back in June of 2023. That comes from the shipping information site Equisys. However,
that sort of stuff pisses you off, right? If there's any problems, they're just like, you know what, we'll get by, we'll save a bit of money. Flipping idiots, man.
They don't know anything else about the alleged problem. The Chilean Navy issued a statement confirming its inspection of the vessel, but indicating only that there was a problem with the pressure gauges of the fuel heaters, which was fixed before the ship left port. The U.S. Coast Guard inspected the ship in September of 2023, but noted no deficiencies. We also know that the Dolly's hull was damaged in a 2016 accident. Dutch cargo company Maersk, which handled shipping contracts for the Dolly, was cited by OSHA last summer for violating the Seaman Protection Act after it fired a whistleblower, quote, who had complained about safety violations to the U.S. Coast Guard. We don't know if this is related or not. Under the Seaman Protection Act, though, employees cannot face retaliation if they report maritime safety violations to the U.S. Coast Guard or other federal agencies. Now, there's obviously going to be a ton of lawsuits about this bridge. If you or a loved one was in a catastrophic accident like a giant bridge collapse or just your garden variety car crash, my law firm, the Eagle Team, can help. We can represent you or help find...
He's getting a little cheeky ad for his law firm. Go on, lad. Secure that bag.
As well. It looks like the U.S. government will bear the cost of repairing the bridge, but there's also other damages. The cost of cleanup in the harbor, damages to vehicles, payments to the victims' families, and interruption to other businesses. With respect to delays caused by the crash, the ship might be off the hook. For example, Domino Sugar is located right near the bridge and will probably suffer significant shipping delays. However, most business interruption losses will not be recoverable from the Dolly's ownership because of the 1927 Supreme Court case called Robbins Dry Dock and Repair Co. versus Flint. In that case, the court said that the plaintiff who suffered only economic loss because of another's negligence could not recover through a tort claim. So Domino Sugar probably can't sue the vessel's owners because there's not a contract between them, and the tort claim is not available. Of course, the ship owner will not be the only defendants in these actions. There are probably many different insurance companies with a stake in this litigation. The ship is insured through Britannia, which is one of the maritime insurance clubs that are under the International Group of P&I Clubs, a consortium that provides maritime liability coverage for 90% of ocean freight and pools liability claims among members. And a reinsurer then backs these maritime insurance companies. A reinsurer is a company which provides financial protection to the insurance companies themselves. It's basically insurance for the insurance. And CNN reported that around 80 different insurers provide around $3 billion in coverage to the Dolly's insurers. Barclays said that the total insurance claims could be between $1 and $3 billion. And since the risk is spread to many different companies, experts don't expect a huge spike in maritime insurance rates. Of course, all of these companies will be involved in the litigation. The NTSB and the Singapore shipping authorities are both conducting investigations, and personal injury lawyers are also looking at whether private engineering and construction companies were negligent, and state and federal agencies are also involved. And I'm sure experts will also assess whether there were any problems with the key bridge's design or upkeep. According to the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, more than 1/3 of America's bridges need repair, and the group classified over 43,000 bridges as structurally deficient, though you might expect the American Road and Transportation Builders Association to be a little liberal with what it calls defective, given that they have a vested interest in that. But most bridges were designed to last about 50 years, and the average age of an American bridge is 44 years. And often bridge maintenance gets deferred so that there's a backlog of maintenance and lack of funds to complete necessary repairs. So if there's an issue with the bridge, whose fault is it? Well, first we think about who owns and maintains the bridge. The defendants will include the state and multiple engineering firms. I'm sure all parties will hire expert witnesses to opine on whether the bridge should have been strong enough to withstand the impact. And this will be a complicated analysis. Maryland authority...
Would any bridge be able to withstand a ship that big crashing into it? I mean, I don't know if any bridge could withstand that. I mean, the way it fell, it was like a box of like a matchstick bridge. Like, just instantaneously just all fell apart like that. So it seemed a bit brittle, but in reality, would any bridge be able to survive that? I have no idea. I don't really know enough about bridges for starters, but I'm assuming that all bridges on this planet would have issues with a massive ship like that crashing into it.
These will argue that since the bridge was up to code, their role in the bridge collapse was minimal to non-existent. Though there seems to be a growing consensus among engineers that nothing could have withstood this particular impact. And there have been some other accidents involving bridges that have led to huge jury verdicts and settlements. A pedestrian bridge at Florida International University collapsed on March 15th.
What the? What the? I'm not when this. He's about to say when was this? Was there people on this as well?
In 2018.
2018? Oh, it's quite recent.
Crushing cars and killing 6 people.
Oh my days, I've never heard of that either.
The NTSB determined that the FIGG bridge engineers made design errors and failed to identify the risks associated with structural cracks in the bridge before it collapsed. And in that case, the Florida Department of Transportation argued that its involvement with the bridge was minimal since the local engineering and construction firms were under contract with the university, not the state. But the plaintiffs discovered evidence that companies involved in the design and construction ignored warnings that the bridge was likely to cause injuries and death. And as a result, the engineering firm settled with the victims for over $102 million in damages. But the Key Bridge collapse is the deadliest incident since the I-35 bridge collapse in Minneapolis in 2007, killing 13 people and injuring 145. That bridge was 40 years old at the time, and although Minneapolis owned and operated the bridge, it contracted with engineering and construction firms to maintain it.
And then it just split apart like a gigantic zipper.
What the fuck?
And I went forward as the bridge collapsed.
The NTSB concluded that the steel gusset plates joining the bridge's beams together were too thin. And the Minnesota Department of Transportation had a contract with an engineering firm, URS, to evaluate the bridge's structural integrity. The state sued URS for breach of contract and negligence for failing to discover the structural defects. URS filed an indemnity action against Jacobs Engineering, the company that built the original bridge. And Jacobs blamed URS and the state, arguing that the collapse was caused by modifications to the bridge made by URS at the direction of the state. The two companies battled it out in court before settling with the state. However, URS was in much deeper water with the victims' families and wound up settling a wrongful death lawsuit for $52 million. So you can expect to see myriad lawsuits for negligence, breach of contract, wrongful death, contribution and indemnity for sure. And there's almost certainly going to be an intense battle of experts in litigating these claims. Though one potential roadblock for plaintiffs is proving that the standard of care was breached. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg alluded to this issue in his comments after the crash.
What we do know is a bridge like this one, completed in the 1970s, was simply not made to withstand a direct impact on a critical support pier from a vessel that weighs about 200 million pounds, orders of magnitude bigger than cargo ships that were in service in that region at the time that the bridge was first built.
And that argument has been persuasive in court in the past. In 1983, a 100-foot section of the Mianus River Bridge fell into the river after midnight, killing 3 people and injuring 2 others.
Okay, there's a lot more bridge collapses than I realise. I don't know how often this sort of stuff happened. Obviously, I know it's a thing. It's going to happen because there's so many bridges in the world and all different things, little small details will cause these things to happen, but it seems a lot more common than I realised.
Investigators blame the collapse on 2 corroded pin and hanger assemblies that allowed the section of the bridge to give way. The NTSB said that the state of Connecticut failed to adequately inspect and maintain the bridge to prevent the corrosion of the pin. Connecticut then sued the engineering company for over $20 million, arguing that the engineers breached engineering standards of the period it was built between 1953 and 1955. The state's experts said engineers allowed too much skew angle between the bridge and the deck, resulting in a force that over time pushed the pin and hanger apart. But a jury cleared the engineering firm, finding that the structure did meet the appropriate design standards for the time. So if the Key Bridge's original construction is a contributing factor in the collapse, then plaintiffs might not be able to collect from the original builders and designers if the bridge design was consistent with the industry standards at the time. And just like bridges were designed for a more simple time, so too was the telephone and email, which is probably why I used to get inundated with spam.
Oh, is this another ad? And you secure in that bag, baby, get that money. Well, there we go. This is a little legal look into, I guess what's going to happen. I was going into this thinking they were talking about paying to build the bridge again, but obviously that's not going to be the case. They're talking about the victims and the victims' families, and I mean, I hope they get some good money for that. I mean, I know it's not going to bring their family back, and there's nothing that will ever replace that, but hopefully they get some financial gain from this horrific stuff that's happened to them and their loved ones. It's saying to me that if one niche hobbyist ship watcher hadn't set up that 24/7 live stream of the port of Baltimore, we'd have no footage of the collapse, let alone high definition. As someone who works in civil engineering with the state DOTS, that over 1/3 of bridges needs repair is not an overstatement at all. In fact, it's probably an understatement. Damn, I mean, this has definitely brought up some issues on like the bridges in the US, and when like you factor in like the US has some massive bridges. It's a country that relies on bridges really because a lot of the cities are obviously coastal or based around water, because most cities are based around like rivers or lakes or on the coast. So like there's on the ocean, and then there's like island sort of parts of cities that are connected, like New York for example. I guess it's going to show that there's a lot more issues with bridges and stuff in the US, but let me know your thoughts on this. And obviously this video is actually like 5 days old now, so maybe there's more updates since this video, but yeah, obviously it was a horrible thing that happened, and I still remember seeing that for the first time. I was shocked. I was like, how the hell has this happened? It's just insane. It didn't feel real when I first saw it. I was like, is this just like an old video, or is this just a sort of a video that's just CGI or whatever? I mean, I didn't actually think in my head was it CGI, but just looking at it, it didn't feel legit. But yeah, it was, and sadly it was a horrible outcome. But I mean, hopefully the families can get something back from this stuff, but who knows? In this world, maybe they're going to try as hard as they can to not pay them money, right? That's like the whole goal of the companies involved. They're going to try and keep as much money for themselves and not have to pay the victims and stuff. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this, and until next time, peace.